Thanks for joining today's session, Ensuring Strong Customer Authentication with PSD2 and SCA in the Age of the Subscription Model. Our speakers include Rima Koury, VP of Engineering at Vindicia, and Chris Bohatka, Technical Product Manager at CardinalCommerce. Today, we're here to discuss the changes in the payment landscape, a brief introduction of EMV 3D Secure and how EMV 3D Secure helps satisfy the PSD2 and SCA mandate in Europe, and how Vindicia and CardinalCommerce's joint solution helps merchants meet the new mandate. And with that, I'll hand it over to Rima to get started.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone else for joining. As you know, the internet has changed the way people buy and sell goods over the years. E-commerce is on the rise with innovations in networking and computer technology that is occurring at a very rapid pace. As more and more people began doing business online, a need for secure communication and transactions became apparent. In the next few minutes, we will talk about the need for SCA and how that benefits all the parties while keeping friction at a minimum.
Over a 3-year period, the card-not-present fraud total is projected to reach $97 billion. When we look at online purchases, only 80% of online shopping purchases were authorized, compared to 98% in-store. So how can we close this gap? One way is to remove uncertainty in the transaction, enabling issuers with the information they need to make an informed decision on the purchase, and help prevent good shoppers from getting declined, and in turn, prevent lost legitimate sales. Not only does this lead to a poor customer experience, this can also impact your customer loyalty. If a customer is falsely declined on your website, they are more likely to reduce or cease shopping with you in the future. Sure, the declined transaction may be immediate lost revenue, but the reputation damage is arguably a larger impact.
Declining legitimate transactions can result in lost revenue well beyond that authorizations. For customers, this is a very frustrating experience. For merchants, this means the customer could end up shopping elsewhere. And for issuers, the customer might never use that credit card again. So why do these transactions really get declined? Sometimes it's as simple as the issuing bank does not have enough information to make decisions. The minimum set of data that is required usually just includes credit card, numbers, CVV, transaction amount, and very few data for them to make that smart decision. E-commerce continues to accelerate worldwide, with online shopping becoming the preferred way to shop by many customers. This growth in digital commerce requires businesses to prevent card-not-present transactions and fraud and ensure good transactions are seamlessly approved. EMV 3DS makes online purchases easier and more secure than ever.
Visa pioneered the original 3D Secure protocol more than 15 years ago to provide an additional layer of protection for card-not-present transactions before authorization. Now with EMV 3DS, Cardinal can help reduce fraud and false declines, helping good transactions get approved and bad transactions to be challenged or failed. EMV 3DS can be applied to all checkout channels and has been designed to reduce unnecessary friction. Cardinal helps multiple stakeholders achieve a single goal, which is to authenticate the transaction to help increase authorization rates. The EMV 3DS data points plus Cardinal data combine to create a rich data set and exchange between the consumer, merchant, and the issuer. Every transaction has greater dimension and context because each authentication stems from content shared by the stakeholders. Cardholder behavior history builds on merchant data that builds on financial institution data. The result is additional fraud protection, fewer declined transactions, and an upswing in customer trust and sales.
SCA is part of Europe's PSD2 regulations. Under that mandate, applicable transactions are required to have 2 independent authentication factors performed in order to be approved. These factors are categorized in 3 different ways. The first one is possession of something, like a mobile device or a token generator. The second one is knowledge of something, like a password, PIN, or answer to a question. And the third one is inheritance, like fingerprint, face, or voice recognition.
With over 100 data points available to be exchanged between the merchant and the issuer, transaction risk analysis and low-value assessments can be done to expedite the transaction in accordance with PSD2. Should the issuer still request a challenge, The user experience with Cardinal Cruise has been tailored to the device the consumer is using, making it natural to complete the challenge and proceed with the purchase. This includes modern challenge methods such as biometric authentication, making it a seamless experience and satisfying the 2 or more factors required for SCA.
SCA will be required on card transactions in which both the merchant's acquiring bank and the bank issuing the buyer's debit or credit card are located within the European Economic Area, EEA. Under the guidelines, exemptions to SCA requirements will be allowed for certain types of transactions. Obtaining an exemption essentially allows a transaction to take place without adhering to the SCA requirement of needing 2 factors of authentication. These exemptions include low-risk transactions. This exemption will allow an acquirer to request approval from issuing bank to avoid SCA up to a certain transaction amount limits based on the acquirer's overall fraud rate, calculated on rolling quarterly basis. The second exemption would be low-value exemptions. These are classified as remote digital transactions under 30 euros and may qualify for a low-value exemption. And finally, trusted beneficiaries, also known as whitelisting, where the issuing bank can offer their customers an enrollment process that allows them to add their trusted merchants to the issuer's whitelist and bypass SCA when buying from that merchant in the future. SCA is required on the initial enrollment and on a credit card account number for a merchant to be whitelisted. For subsequent transactions, if a merchant qualifies for the programs and chooses to send the trusted beneficiaries exemption flag, SCA is not performed on that transaction.
A quick clarification point: an SCA exemption does not translate to not running payment authentication. The expectation is that payment authentication still occurs, with a proper indicator set to request the exemption, and the issuer may honor it with a frictionless cardholder experience.
So, how does this really work? If you look at the diagram, you can see that a new step of the customer authentication is added to the purchase flow, usually after the credit card payment method is entered and the order summary is given. The merchant will make an API call to Vindicia, passing in this information, usually during a transaction authorization or subscription creation call. Vindicia will send the authentication request to Cardinal and get back the response. Vindicia will evaluate the response, and if no challenge is required, the purchase flow will continue to authorize the transaction and return back the result as usual in a frictionless purchase. However, if a challenge is required, the purchase flow is stopped to gather more information. Vindicia will return the redirect URL in the API response to the merchant, who will have to redirect the user to do the multi-factor authentication. Once the user successfully completes the authentication process, the merchant can then pass in the authorization token to Vindicia in a finalized SCA API call, and Vindicia will process the authorization request. So, how do you enable 3DS for your e-commerce flow? Vindicia's API have been modified to support passing new 3DS specific fields, including the reference to the device information that was collected in the previous bin lookup steps. Check the API response to see if the issuing bank requires a 3DS challenge. If a challenge is required, the returned information will include a redirect URL from the issuing bank, and the merchant site will be required to handle the redirect of the customer to authenticate their identity. Based on the result, either continue or require a different payment method for the purchase.
Thanks to our speakers for today's session, and we'd like to thank you for viewing this recording. For further information about SCA effective dates in your region and Vindicia and CardinalCommerce support contact information, please check the description of this recording.